welcome everybody. Could I ask the leader please to move the recommendation as given in the order papers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen of the public, I'm sorry to have kept you away for so long, but this was a fairly intense and detailed debate. The motion is clear. The executive recommends that the council approve the recommendation as set out in the exempt report. As you know, Madam Mayor, we are committed to open government and as such recorded votes. Since it is late in time and there was a fair degree of unanimity in the vote in exempt, I would be very happy, Madam Mayor, if those who wish to vote against it made themselves known, those who wish to abstain made themselves known. It might save us an awfully long roll call and let us get moving.
Madam Mayor, I wish to abstain. Councillor Edmonds.
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to vote in favour, but I'm not sure the webcast's working. I can't seem to see it working at this end. So, but just to let you know that bit.
Is there anybody else who wishes to abstain?
Or vote against.
Or vote against? Right, so that is agreed.
Thank you,
Is
Madam
that
Mayor.
agreed?
I would like to make one small comment, which will upset many, I'm sure. But I would ask people to reflect on how much of what we said in exempt could have been said in open. My humble opinion is that there is not one single speech that we made in exempt that could have been made in open. And I have to say, I am surprised and disappointed that when the opposition ask for a legal opinion as to whether it should be done and are given a very clear legal statement, that they chose to overrule it and vote against it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, on a point of, could I just make a reply to that, please?
Only very quickly, Councillor Martin.
I think it's just fair to say that we would have couched our speeches in a rather different way, and we would have expected them to have gone into exempt, but it does not take away from the fact that there should have been a debate in open session. And for an administration which prides itself on transparency and openness, I'm surprised by such a reaction from the leader. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Then shall we move to part 2 matters?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. It's been so long since we did them. I thought they'd gone away. Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I have, let me flip over, part 2 matters. I have 3 speakers in part 2 matters. The first one is Councillor Hyman on Executive 53/20 property acquisition. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thank you. We are on the 20th of November meetings, aren't we here? Which is, I just wanted to ask.
You put down the request to speak, so I assume you know which it is.
Yes, it's okay. We've just zapped back a lot of pages there, and I've just found it on page 23 of the papers. I was going to ask, in respect of the purchase of a supermarket that is not in the borough, whether it would be appropriate. Well, I'm not asking because I haven't put the question in advance. So what I'm saying is it appropriate, and I know other members are as interested as I am to know how much we paid for that supermarket. The deal has been done, we've been told, and a few pages later it says that, and we were told that at the exec meeting. I think that residents and members could quite reasonably expect that, apart perhaps from the inappropriate legal advice that's in there, the exempt information, the pink papers and the amount paid could and should now be released into the public domain. So in the interest of transparency, and before I or anyone else mentions where it's located or from where, whatever, perhaps the leader or portfolio holder or mayor would just very quickly ask Mr. Taylor, the monitoring officer, whether members are free to now disclose that information publicly, and could you tell us what the price was if that's the if that's the case? So that's my issue there. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
My pleasure, Councillor Hyman. My brief answer to you is it will be divulged at the proper time. If the monitoring officer wishes to speak, he is more than welcome.
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. Happy to deal with separately.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I have Councillor Seaborn on minute executive 62/20 carbon neutrality action plan.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's good to see that we've finally got a carbon neutrality action plan, albeit some 9 months behind schedule. But I do acknowledge the considerable effort put into producing this plan by the limited officer resource allocated to the climate emergency, and particularly accepting the difficult working conditions of the past 9 months. However, in keeping with other recent plans, the plan is only partly costed, only partly prioritised, and in general is more of a wish list than a plan. But it is a start. At the last executive meeting, Councillor Mulliner and I raised several significant points about the plan to which no material responses were provided. The theoretical emissions reduction trajectory, which doesn't even include emissions from our housing stock, appears to be totally unconnected to the plan. It requires operational emissions to be around 1/4 of the 2015 level by the end of next year. Apart from the fundamental question of why we're actually using a 2015 baseline to measure progress against a plan which in effect has only just started, I'm struggling to see how this major reduction is to be achieved. It would be good if the evolution of the plan leads to a trajectory based on deliverability rather than aspiration. Second point I'd like to make is that the plan doesn't include a line item in the near-term built environment list of actions for the delivery of a new asset management plan for our council houses. Without this, we'll not have a structured way forward for the major task of improving the energy efficiency of our 4,800 homes, and we won't have an understanding of the huge gap likely to run into tens of millions of pounds between what we can actually afford to do and what the government needs to subsidise in order to achieve it. And I have to say, I find it strange that after all the fanfare of declaring a climate emergency in September last year, the first report on progress will not be until October next year, and that it will be presented to Environment ONS and Executive, but not to full council. So, Madam Mayor, can I conclude by asking the portfolio holder 3 things? When the annual report is submitted in October next year, will it contain a CO2 reduction trajectory that is based on what can actually be delivered by the plan rather than what we would like the plan to deliver? Will the 2021 annual report attempt to set out what can be realistically achieved in terms of emissions reduction from our council housing stock and spell out the level of government support required to make significant inroads on this item? And will the portfolio holder consider bringing the report to full council this time next year? We have, after all, declared an emergency. Seems to me that management of emergencies is something that all councillors should have an opportunity to comment on. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question and for supplying it in writing in advance. And I believe the portfolio holder would like to comment.
Thank you, Leader. Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Seaborn, for your question. And I'd like also to take the opportunity to thank Councillor Seaborn specifically and to thank other councillors for their ongoing contribution to the discussions about our trajectory to net zero carbon. And I hope there will be an attempt as we go forward to work together on this on a cross-party basis, because this is a matter which is clearly very, very important, as I think Councillor Seaborn himself will recognise. And as Councillor Seaborn pointed out, the sustainability team has been under-resourced for the scale of the climate emergency work that was required. And we are now building capacity to enable delivery, starting from a low baseline in terms of capacity when we started our life as an administration. During COVID, most of that resource was redeployed to deal with Waverley's response to the pandemic. That is the reason for the 3-month delay in producing the final action plan after the public consultation, and that date was moved from September to the December meeting of full council. In terms of the trajectory is based on a government developed tool to enable local authorities to project the level of commitment that is required to meet the challenge of a carbon neutral Waverley by 2030. The borough-wide emissions does include Waverley's housing stock. The plan recognises that more detailed work will be needed to be done to quantify and cost the projects within it, and this is being planned for 2021. A consultancy will be engaged early next year to support the more technical work that is required to take the plan to the next stage. In terms of the reference to 2015 as a baseline year, 2015 is the latest year of complete and accurate data that we hold in terms of Waverley's own carbon emissions. And for consistency purposes, the same year has been chosen for the housing baseline, although we do hold more detailed, more recent data with regard to the housing stock. Baseline is the year against which we will measure our progress. It's a reference point. The end target of carbon neutrality remains the same regardless of the baseline year. The newly appointed asset manager in housing is already working on the production of a housing asset strategy, which will include detailed information on how Waverley will bring its housing stock to as close to carbon neutrality as possible within our financial boundaries. And then in terms of the question regarding a scrutiny of the plan, there is a section on the governance of our climate emergency. And so far as action plans are concerned, in general terms, action plans are usually updated annually. This plan was adopted in December 2020, and so a progress update in October 2021 is a reasonable timescale to report on some deliverables. The executive will have quarterly updates. That is what we have agreed. So in short, I suppose the answer to the 3 questions in the order in which they've been asked is: 1, we will be engaging with technical experts to help us build on the more technical and financial detail of the action plan, and this will be done early next year. Secondly, the action plan stated as one of its high-level targets, and I quote from it, that, quote, we will produce an asset management strategy which will present a decarbonisation path for our existing housing stock by November 2021, and work has already begun to improve data on housing stock and enable the development of an asset management strategy that aims to decarbonise Waverley's housing stock. And thirdly, the progress update will be presented to full council next year. So I hope that answers Councillor Seaborne's question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The next question I have is, our speaker I have is Councillor Stephen Mulliner, also on the same item, Executive Minute 62/20, Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Leader. I'll be brief given the hour. My principal point is to suggest to the portfolio holder that we need to show a clear subdivision in the action plan between those projects which are to be funded out of Waverley's if you like, immediate own resources and those which clearly need the taxpayers' help, government help. So could I suggest that both in the existing two-way split between what are Waverley Borough Council targets and Waverley Borough targets, each of those in turn has a section for those which we will fund ourselves from our normal receipts and those which we know we have to seek help from outside. And this leads me on to the one point of disagreement with my colleague, Councillor Seaborn. I think he referred to the retrofitting costs of our council stock as tens of millions. I think he's an order of magnitude out. I've seen somewhere a figure of around about 70 to 80,000 per house. I actually met a member of Farnham's Extinction Rebellion last year, and he told me how much he spent on his, and that actually chimed very much with what other local authorities have. So on that basis, I think we're talking 300 million for our housing stock, and that clearly has to be funded by someone other than our own council taxpayers. And my last point is that I do hope we will see this at full council in a year's time. That's certainly what was indicated in Executive 4920, which was where the portfolio holder said that he'd be bringing this to full council as well as executive. But I can appreciate not much is to be shown now, so it's next year, which will be much more interesting. But I go back to my first point. I think we need to separate clearly those things we can fund ourselves, which clearly we can have some control over the delivery timetable, and those things which depend upon government handing out money, which by definition we can't control so easily. I think unless we have that degree of reality in the plan, it will be, as I said, as executive, largely aspirational and not much help to anyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nolan. Madam Mayor, I have no more speakers and I would be delighted to wind up the minutes of the executive.
Can I ask members to agree that the minutes of the executive be received and noted?
Agreed.
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 Shall we go very swiftly on to the minutes of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee? Councillor Knowles, would you present these, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to present the minutes of the meetings of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee held on the 9th of November 2020, and I have a seconder.
I beg to second, Madam Mayor, Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you. At the top of the page on 79, it says submitted to council meeting date. I think today's date should be in there. There are no matters in part one. I have been advised of no request to speak in part two. However, whilst there are no matters, I want to take this opportunity to update council on two matters that the committee has been considering. The first is the review of the council's Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy. We first considered revisions to this policy back in January 2020 and approved a draft revised policy for consultation, which responded to recommendations from the Department of Transport on a safer system of taxi and private hire vehicle licensing, as well as other changes to update the conditions for licensing. Whilst the consultation did take place, consideration of feedback was overtaken by the COVID pandemic, and the review of the policy was put on hold temporarily. Officers have now revisited the proposed revisions, and the committee has approved an update draft policy for consultation that reflects the new statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, introduces an age policy for licensed vehicles, and will help transition of the taxi fleet to ultra low emission vehicles, and update other conditions of licensing. The Licensing and Regulatory Committee held a special meeting last week, the minutes of which will doubtless come to the next council, to progress the street trading review. A number of members and town and parish councillors responded to informal consultation with general support for the approach by which all streets and public open areas next to streets will be designated consent streets, with the exception of those already designated as prohibited streets, which will remain as such. This will give the council much greater control over street trading, and in particular traders serving takeaway food from mobile vans, which have the potential to cause disruption and nuisance for residents. There is a detailed legal process to be followed in order to designate streets consent streets, and the Licensing and Regulatory Committee last week approved a draft revised street trading policy. Then the formal notices which have been published relating to the intention to pass a resolution on street trading and designation of consent and prohibited streets. That was just to update in more detail of the first item is in the minutes and the other will follow doubtless at the next council. That concludes my report. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. Can I ask the council to receive and note the minutes? Could you unmute your microphones and indicate your agreement?
Agreed.
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 We move to the Audit Committee minutes. Can I invite Councillor Peter Marriott to present the minutes of the Audit Committee?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As with most aspects of the council work over the year, this has been difficult in dealing with the preparation of the accounts, both with the impact of COVID-19 and also the effect of legislative changes, together with a more critical approach required from the external auditors. The accounts were finalised by November the 30th, and that, as you remember, has been extended from the usual July the 31st by the government. So I should like to thank Graham Clark and his team for their efforts in making this happen, and especially since over half of the councils in the country couldn't have failed to achieve this. I should like to move the minutes of the Audit Committee meetings held on the 9th of November and the 30th of November to be received and noted as included in the pages of your agenda pack, 83 to 90. I believe I have a seconder.
Beg to support. That's Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. There are no Part 1 matters, and no members have registered to speak on the Part 2 matters. Therefore, that concludes the presentation of minutes.
I think I have registered to speak, actually.
Hello. Registered.
Councillor Hyman, would you like to read your report, please? Your question.
Thank you. I did submit a question in advance, and I'll cut it down to very short if I may, but this is a governance issue and it's referred to at Audit 3020. Again, the same issue that Councillor Knowles mentioned under licensing about having the date at the top. That applies to this as well, Madam Mayor, so that perhaps should be corrected, but it's a side issue. I assume that other members are as fed up as I am with Groundhog Day and evasion of this issue as I am, but to correct some misconceptions, because a number of occasions recently there have been various people have asserted that I'm wrong on this issue. So I just want to clarify and correct misconceptions that the National Planning Policy Guidance, which has been issued, states that the competent authority must now assess the robustness of mitigation measures through an appropriate assessment. That is a fact, it's not my opinion. The ruling itself states that an appropriate assessment must contain a full and precise analysis of the measures capable of avoiding or reducing any significant effect on the site concerned. Unquote, that's paragraph 36 of the ruling itself, and paragraph 38 of that same ruling says, and I quote, that the assessment may not have lacunae, that's gaps, and must contain complete, precise and definitive findings and conclusions capable of removing all reasonable scientific doubt as to the effects of the proposed works on the protected site concerned. So those are facts, they are not my opinion, and I'm just asking, Madam Mayor, would you please now confirm, I've sent you those documents, I've sent them around before in the past a couple of times, please confirm that those are facts and that to present them as merely my own opinion is incorrect and unfair or unjust, or would you prefer to take that to outside of the meeting? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman, for your comments and questions. The minutes of the committee meetings are approved at subsequent agenda meetings of that committee. During that item of the committee's agenda, there is an opportunity to query, expand upon or debate the minutes. The purpose of this item at full council is for the council to receive the minutes rather than get into further debate on the published record of a particular committee's meeting. Your comments this evening will of course be included in the minutes of this meeting. As no other councillor has registered to speak on this item, could I ask the council to agree and receive and note the minutes? Will members please unmute their
Agreed.
microphones?
Agreed.
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 Right, review the political proportionality of the council and the allocation of committee seats. Councillors, the report setting out the political proportionality of the new councillors has been circulated. The recommendation is to agree the political proportionality and the allocation of committee seats. Do I have a seconder? John? What do you next? Somebody else second?
I'm happy to second if nobody else is going to, Madam Mayor.
Right. I think the Deputy Mayor has left us. Are there any speakers?
Very quickly, Madam Mayor, Councillor Hyman here. It's on page 91, recommendation. It says it's recommended that we agree the proportional allocation. I would ask that you, as quickly as possible, change that agrees to note it on the 3 different grounds. On page 93, under 8.1, it says the report fulfills statutory reporting requirements. There is no alternative option. If we've got no alternative option, there's no need to agree it. And it also says under governance journey, this report's being made to the full council for noting in accordance with statutory requirements. So it tells us that we're noting it. The other thing is, I do not want to agree the very last line, which is 4 + 2 + 2 + 1 is 8, because it equals 9, which is the number of people on the committee. So I'd rather note that than agree to it. So there's 3 reasons. Can we please just add to note rather than to agree? Because that's what it's here for. Thank you.
I think that we have to agree this motion for it to carry through. Could I ask if any member wishes to vote against or abstain? Otherwise, the motion is carried.
Good.
Does anybody wish to abstain or vote against? No?
I'll abstain.
You're going to abstain. Right, thank you, Councillor Hyman. Right. Now that concludes the meeting of the Waverley Full Council, but members are asked to remain online to carry out the council's duties as trustee of the Hewitt Bequest Trust and the Shottermill Trust. Is it your wish that I should adjourn these for a later meeting? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 We now move to the meeting of the Joseph Hewitt Bequest. Is it your wish that I should adjourn this for a later meeting? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Right, I think, people, that is the end.
Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Merry Christmas to you all.
Happy Christmas.
everybody.
Yes.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Christmas.
Happy New Year.
Well done, Martin.
Merry Christmas to you all.
I do like a short meeting.